Thank you, Rob, for that generous introduction. Welcome. My name is Otto Ballintijn. I'm trying to give you today, on Rob's instructions, a bit of a provoking presentation. I'm not going to talk too much about our technology. I'm going to talk about what I've learned over the last 20 years trying to put this technology in the market all over the place. And it's interesting to see how the whole circle of regulation, contractors, utility owners, and other stakeholders make every market different. You can have one technology, but in every market you need a different story. So I'm going to try to run you through some of the things I learned that I find important with regard to underground geospatial location, if you want to call it that. Not necessarily my technology, but all the technologies that are out there. So I would like to take you through something that I find key in this whole thing. So if we go out there and want to build something above ground, whether it can be in public space or anything like that, I have to go and get a permit from the city or the municipality. And I have to actually execute it according to the permitted design. But what actually happens underground? Because is that the same? Well, the answer is not really. Yeah, it seems to be that when we cover things up, we don't care anymore about it, but we should, because it's getting more and more busy underground. Now, so what's the difference between the above ground and the underground with let's say, in respect to the regulatory or permittable aspects of it? Both are in the public space. We always think of public space as above ground, but underground is the same public space. Both require permits. You have to say what you're going to do. Yeah. So if I receive a permit for this building and I build that, I'm in trouble. Yeah, deep, deep trouble. I did not execute according to my permit. So now if I ask for a permit for this and I do that, not many authorities seem to mind. They don't even know, because there is no loopback. So what causes the difference in approach between the above ground and the underground management of space? That's a key thing. First of all, lack of clear responsibility. Who is responsible for the accuracy of what we do underground? Oftentimes, it's the contractor who says, this is what I've done. Here you go. Here's the back of an envelope, exactly where you wanted it to be. Sorry, the ground is closed. Trust me, it's there. Lack of technical knowledge. We've seen that a lot of times, that they say, oh, we can't trace it with a GPS machine or with a ground penetrating radar. All right, we'll believe you. And then there is a lack of strategic vision and urgency. Now, that is a key issue. That is not something that you should give to the contractors or even to the utility owners. That is something that belongs solely with the municipality, just like it does above ground. Yeah, like the example I gave with the building, it's exactly the same. Somebody needs to have a strategic vision about your city, the way things look. So this applies to everybody. These three issues, it's very difficult to come to an agreement that all utilities and all responsible stakeholders on a municipal level could ever agree on. I mean, who do you even invite to that table to start with? Yeah. So, and this is a worldwide problem. The underground is typically organized very, very inefficiently if you compare it to the above ground. And that needs to stop, because particularly here in Singapore, we're running out of space, but that's not just Singapore, it's everywhere. I'll give you an example of what inefficiency actually means in terms of waste of space, if we want to call it. So here we have a horizontal directional drill we mapped a couple of years back, and we're going to focus on that area over here. Now, this is that area. That's the as-built. This is where it really was installed. And that was the as-planned or as permitted. Yeah, they had to follow the sidewalk, but they, for some reason, they drifted away. Could be electromagnetic interference on the steering system. If you ask the contractor, he'll have a list of 10 excuses why that happened, and this is the best he could do, and he has to get paid. Or he doesn't even tell the owner. Now, what's the problem? At this depth, where this pipe is laying, we've now wasted more than half the street at that depth. So if I'm the owner of public space, I'm the manager of the public space, being the municipality, I would be very crossed because I went outside of what was permitted. The strange thing is, this municipality doesn't know because they never asked for an as-built post-installation. So all they know, that's what I permitted last time. If I come now with another permit request that follows the middle of the street, they say, yeah, go ahead. No problem. There's nothing there. Yes, there is. Now, what we do in practice, we tell the contractor he's responsible if he hits somebody else, even though the other people's maps might be wrong. And that is also something I think that needs to change very quickly, because why do we always blame the contractor if he works with flawed data? Similar, this is the depth profile of that particular pipe. Now it goes quite deep, about 12 meters. But you see exactly in that spot where he lost control of his drill head, he almost dropped 1.5 meters right there. So at the depth level as well, you have an issue. Now let me show that from a different perspective. So here we have a street somewhere in London. Now if we look at it from a three-dimensional perspective, you can say, okay, as an owner, as an asset owner, as an asset manager, I would probably say, okay, these are all corridors. Yeah, virtually, I will cut it up into spaces of a certain dimension. And in each of these spaces, let's say, I'm not saying that these squares are representative, I'm just showing it as an example. I'm telling contractor A or utility A, you can use this corridor on that street. And they, of course, give you a nice drawing that makes exactly a lot of sense and it follows that corridor. Now, he will be wasting or using, it's not wasting, he's using that one block. Now that happens. Yeah, you have some horizontal deviation, you have some depth deviations. Now all of a sudden, that pipe is occupying 4 of these blocks. Total waste. Literally a waste of space. And it's scarce, and it's getting scarcer. Yeah. So again, big problem is the municipality does not know this. So we start to take very big safety margins on around all of these pipes because we don't exactly know where they are. Yeah. And that means, particularly in Europe, we see that horizontal drillings are going deeper and deeper and deeper. If I went to 5 meters, the next guy goes to -7, and the next guy goes to -9, and then they'll probably go like, oh, let's go to -13 because we probably have a deviation of at least 2 meters. And every time we do that, we waste space. So for the case of Singapore, going underground, this is the Urban Redevelopment Authority who's quoted this. So they want to optimize land use by going underground and freeing up valuable surface for more livable uses. So that means that shallow utilities have to move. Yeah, and they have to move. They can't go up, so they have to go down. Yeah. Not only do they have to go down, they have to go down way before they plan building the livable space in the vertical direction. So we have to start installing all this infrastructure long time before they start digging whatever they want to do underground, whether that's railways or transport routes or whatever. So that means that the use of HDD and similar type of technologies will probably increase in Singapore. It's not done a hell of a lot today, but it will increase. So the SLA released in 2017, its standards and specifications for utility surveying in Singapore. As far as I can tell, maybe I'm wrong, but back in the days, it wasn't a mandate yet. It wasn't mandated, but it was kind of adopted by the Singapore government, and hopefully that will be done in a broad sense so that it will become de facto standard. So this is a very good opportunity to merge the two. We have to start putting utilities deeper underground. We have a new chance of creating a layer of information that is much better than what we used to do on the shallow utilities. This is our chance to do it right. And this is also exactly where gyro mapping will play a vital role, because it delivers uniform, very important word, uniform and highly accurate geospatial data. Now, when you go deeper, when you go deeper, most of the traditional technologies become obsolete. You can't use a GPR or a above ground tracing system. You have to do something with something like a gyro. And there are different technologies that can, different suppliers and different technologies that provide you solutions. But most of the traditional stuff that surveyors have in the back of their car won't work at that depth. A very brief bit about Gyro Probe. What does it do? And I brought one along. This is our latest unit. This is the smallest one we have. That goes into a 3 centimeter internal telecom duct. So that's usually the smallest telecom duct. It can bend, so it can go around the corners. And this unit we've just launched, and it's a very important unit for the rollout of 5G, for example. And why 5G? A lot of operators have either DN40 or DN50 pipes in the ground, internally 30 or 40 millimeters. They were laid for the 4G generation cable, which is a pretty small cable. Now, I've been in Seattle and Washington, and they are using that pipe, the 30 millimeters, to put in 1,756 fibers in 3 centimeters. They're using the 40 millimeter to put in 3,456 fibers in one cable. Cannot imaginable, you know. You don't want to cut that one, by the way, because you're splicing for the rest of your life to fix it. But that poses a problem. First of all, the size of that cable is such that it just fits in the duct. So in order to be able to pull that in or blow that in, they need to know what the shape of that duct is, because they don't want to get stuck. Because if they overpull the cable, it's gone. And one reel costs about $100,000. So they're trying to do unimaginable things with these small ducts. I don't know exactly what Singapore has installed so far, but just to give you an example how big it is. So this particular unit was developed particularly for that purpose. They just want to know, will my cable go through or not? And because we're making mapping tools anyway, we've made it a mapping device as well. So it's nice and small. I'll leave it here. You can look at it later. Now, this is one of our bigger tools. We can go up. Bigger is never a problem. Small is a problem. So typically we have a tool consists of a sensor and then some sort of centralizer. In this case, it's a wheel centralizer. In here, we have the foam centralizers. Yeah. So long as it sits nicely in the pipe. They've got gyroscopes, accelerometers, and so forth. Won't bore you with it too much. So the idea is that we measure the core axis of this particular probe, or of the probe, which is then aligned with the pipe, and then it will tell you where the pipe is going. So we measure basically all the movements while it's going from A to B in the forward direction, which is distance, the change in heading, the change in pitch, and it rolling around its own axis. So with that information, we can tell you where the pipe is laying. Now, the nice thing is we don't need to follow it when we do that. We just stick it in, pull it to the other side, take it out, hook it up to the computer, and it will draw the line. Right, Jesse? More or less, right? Jesse knows. So what are the benefits of gyro mapping? You can basically put it in anything, any utility. Typically it's going to be a round pipe, can be a square box, can be a culvert, can be an X shape, it doesn't really matter. It can go to any depth. Like I said, I know it's going in the ground here. I know it's coming out where those tall buildings are. And that's all I need to know. As long as I know where it will come out. What it does in between doesn't really matter. It can go 30 meters deep, 50 meters deep. It can go to the left, to the right. It can be right next to a power cable. It's not affected by any of that. Yeah. And you don't need to trace it from above ground. So these are very efficient ways of, or this actually makes it very usable for this deeper layer of pipes that we're going to be laying in this country soon. Coupled to that, it's an open platform output, so you can read the output straight in AutoCAD, Esri, whatever you have. Some Bentley programs probably. So how does that then compare to your traditional technologies, mapping technologies? So we have a comparison here, which is only comparing accessible subsurface pipes. Yeah, there are some situations, of course, where these technologies are better than this, but we're just talking about accessible subsurface ducts and pipes. So your traditional surveyor, he always has to put his stick on something. Yeah, if he doesn't see it, he can't map it. So if it's existing or trenchless, that technology does not work. If it's newly trenched, the trench is still open, he can still put his stick on top. Walkover beacon systems, there are many of them out there. They work well for shallow infrastructure, don't work very well in the neighborhood of electromagnetic noise of some sort, power cables, train rails, metal sheeting and that sort of stuff. Same for the GPR, and I think GPR here in Asia is even more challenging because of the high water table. But they have the benefit, of course, particularly GPR, that they can pick up, for example, a bundle of cables. Yeah, so there is certainly an upside to each of these. But a gyroscope doesn't have any issue with either of that because it travels through the duct. Whether it's covered or not, it doesn't really matter. I don't need to see the pipe. I only need to know where to access and to exit. So the underground as an asset, that is an important message. And Rob already mentioned Will Kovacs from the city of Rotterdam. I think he was here last. One of his colleagues. Rotterdam is a very progressive city in the sense of thinking about the underground. When we talk about underground assets, we think, oh, that must be a telecom duct or a sewer pipe. That's an asset. Or whatever you have underground. What the Rotterdam has done, they said, no, the entire underground is our asset. Your pipe is in my asset. And that's an important change in the way that they approach everything. So the first 2 points is pretty straightforward, and you're already doing that in Singapore. Yeah. So you have to manage it as an asset. So you have to work off a master plan. What do I want to do with my asset? And you have to issue permits that optimize the use of that asset. Now that's already said that, it's nothing important. Now we come to something that's more important. We have to define clear accuracy levels on how accurate do we need to know what's going on in our assets. And that's something Ian will be talking about later. But it's important that that's picked up. And of course, Singapore already has a starter document about that, but it needs to be refined. When I read that, I think, yeah, you're not capturing everything because it leaves room to interpretation. And you know what happens when you give contractors room for interpretation? You want them to be on that side, and they are on that. Oh, sorry, they are on that side. Sorry, whoever's following. And this is the most important one of them all. As an asset owner, if the underground is the asset again, you have to check your as-built plans to your permit. Because otherwise, like I showed you in that example, how do you know that the next person wants to have a permit in the same street as somebody else who was there a year ago is not going to hit each other? Yeah, and that is something that doesn't happen most of the time. So I will say there's a couple of cities that are working on it, but it's difficult. The other important thing is, of course, that the technology used must be objective. If you, and also the person that does it must be objective. If you allow the contractor to do the mapping, you never know. Yeah, if you use a technology that's not really made for mapping that situation, you may get flawed results, but you don't know. So there is also on a municipal level a need and a requirement to educate the people. This is possible, and that is the best solution for that situation. The last thing I think is more important than we think: data uniformity. Again, if I read the SLA version of the specifications, there are point frequencies for straights and then point frequencies for bends. Straight and bend are not defined. Is that a straight in the horizontal, in the vertical? Yeah, very difficult. And again, if they get the chance, they'll be on the opposite side of the scale of where you want them to be. So you gotta tie it down. Yeah. And the nice thing about gyro mapping tools is they map 100 times per second. You get 1 sample per centimeter. You can bring that back to a meter point range or whatever easily by one push of the button. Nobody needs to do any extra work. But it is an important way of saying, this is how we want this data. This is the point frequency, regardless of whether it's a bend or a straight, it doesn't matter. Last but not least, start today. We can talk about this for another 30 years. I've talked about it for 20 years and not much has happened, so I'm not a good talker. I'm not convincing, maybe. But you have to start today. You know, it's really cannot stress that hard enough. If you don't start today, the future will always be the future. A wise woman once said to me, the future is like a rainbow. You never get to the end of it. Yeah, it keeps on moving. Only history will tell whether the present, which is a split second right now, we've made the right decision at the present. Now it's history. Everything I said 2 minutes ago is history. So it's something that we need to really focus on, and that's why I admire the job that the DUC does, who's trying to bring together all these stakeholders in the market to sit them around the table and say, guys, let's do something. We can talk about it, but let's do something. And we can never satisfy everybody, but let's do something. Why did I have this page? Oh, yes. Here is something, this is kind of a last final thought. Augmented reality makes your network look cool. We've all seen these things on our trade shows and stuff like that, and they, you've seen them online, right? But if the data feeding the augmented reality software is flawed, it's nothing more than an expensive video game. People don't seem to realize that. They think, oh, I see it on my screen, it must be right. Yeah, but it's junk in, junk out. If we keep putting junk into these programs, but we present it in a nice way, we're not going to move forward. It starts at the beginning. Actually, it starts at the permit. That's where it starts. So take no risk, get it mapped.